You thought you'd seen every twist love and hip-hop Atlanta could throw at you, but nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for what went down when Jasmine, Kirk Frost, and Rasheeda finally had their day in court. The moment the doors closed behind them, the whispers turned into gasps, the side eyes turned into full-blown stares, and fans everywhere knew this wasn't just another legal appearance, this was a reckoning. Emotions ran high before anyone even took a seat, and from the very first glance between Jasmine and Rasheeda, it was clear that old wounds were about to be ripped wide open. Cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom, but don't get it twisted, the drama did not need a lens to be felt. Sources close to the situation say the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jasmine walked in with her head held high, eyes blazing with something between confidence and defiance, while Kirk Frost looked torn, caught between his past choices and the life he's been fighting to protect. And then there was Rasheeda. Calm on the outside, but anyone who's followed her journey knows that silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it means a storm is brewing. Fans are shocked because this wasn't just about paperwork or legal technicalities. This was about years of accusations, denials, whispered conversations, and unresolved pain finally being dragged into the light. Every step down that courthouse hallway felt like a countdown to an explosion. Family members sat on opposite sides, friends avoided eye contact, and even longtime supporters didn't know who to root for anymore. The family was left divided before a single word was spoken. And just when everyone thought they knew how this story would go, an unexpected twist threatened to change everything. A sudden reaction, a hushed argument near the benches, and a look exchanged between Kirk and Jasmine that had spectators leaning forward in disbelief. Was this guilt, regret, or something much deeper that had been hidden from the public all along? One thing is for sure, whatever happened behind those doors is already sending shockwaves through the LHHATL universe. This wasn't closure, this was the beginning of a whole new chapter. Secrets were on the verge of spilling, alliances were about to be tested, and by the time the day was over, nothing, and no one, would be seen the same way again. So buckle up, because what really went down in court might just be the most explosive drama this franchise has ever seen. Eyes. The courthouse steps felt colder than anyone expected, not because of the weather but because of the energy hanging in the air. Jasmine arrived first, heels clicking like a warning shot, her jaw tight and her eyes locked forward as if she had rehearsed this walk 100 times in her mind. Every camera flash outside felt like an accusation, every whisper from the crowd sounded like judgment, but she didn't flinch. In her head, this wasn't just a court date, this was her moment to finally be heard after months of being talked over, dismissed, and painted as the villain in a story she claimed wasn't fully told. As she paused at the entrance, she took a breath so deep it almost shook her shoulders, because she knew once she stepped inside, there would be no turning back. Inside the hallway, Kirk Frost stood a few feet away, pacing slowly, hands clasped together like he was trying to pray and calculate at the same time. His face told a story before his mouth ever opened. Stress lines cut deep across his forehead, and every few seconds he glanced toward the door like he was bracing for impact. People who knew him best could see it clearly, this wasn't the confident Kirk fans were used to seeing on LHHATL. This was a man cornered by his own past decisions, a man trying to balance loyalty, guilt, and fear all at once. When he finally spotted Jasmine walking in, his steps froze. For a split second, their eyes met, and in that silence, years of tension spoke louder than any argument ever could. Rasheeda entered moments later, surrounded by quiet support. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, and didn't look around for approval. Her posture was calm, almost regal, but those closest to her knew that calm was hard-earned. This was the continuation of a journey she never asked to be on, one that tested her marriage, her pride, and her sense of self. She walked past Kirk without touching him, without even looking directly at him, and that distance said more than any shouting match could have. Jasmine noticed it immediately, her lips pressing into a thin line as if she had expected something different, something louder, something messier. As everyone took their seats, the tension thickened. Family members sat divided, friends whispered behind hands, and even the court staff seemed aware that this case carried more emotional weight than most. Jasmine shifted in her chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her hands gripping her bag like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Kirk stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. Rasheeda kept her eyes forward too, but her breathing was slow and deliberate, like she was steadying herself for whatever was about to come. When the proceedings began, Jasmine was the first to be addressed, and the sound of her name echoed louder than expected. She stood, smoothing her jacket, and as she began to speak, her voice carried a mix of confidence and restrained anger. She talked about being silenced, about being painted as a liar, about how the truth had been twisted until even she barely recognized it anymore. Every word felt rehearsed, but the emotion behind it was raw. She glanced toward Kirk as she spoke, not with hatred, but with something closer to disappointment, like she was asking him silently why it had to come to this. Kirk shifted uncomfortably as Jasmine spoke, his foot tapping against the floor. When it was his turn, he stood slower, as if the weight of the room was pressing down on his shoulders. His words were careful, chosen like stepping stones across dangerous water. He acknowledged mistakes without fully naming them, expressed regret without fully owning it, and emphasized his commitment to his family like a shield. Some in the room nodded, others rolled their eyes, and Jasmine's expression hardened with every vague sentence that didn't say what she felt needed to be said. Rasheeda's moment came, and when she stood, the room felt different. Quieter, heavier. She didn't raise her voice or dramatize her pain. Instead, she spoke with clarity, with a steadiness that only comes from surviving storms. She talked about boundaries, about respect, about the toll that public humiliation takes on a marriage and a woman's sense of dignity. She didn't look at Jasmine when she spoke, but her words landed directly between them like a line drawn in the sand. As the back and forth continued, emotions ran high. Jasmine interrupted at one point, unable to hold back her frustration, and the sharpness in her voice sent murmurs through the room. Kirk tried to interject, his voice cracking just enough to reveal the strain he was under, and Rasheeda's composure wavered for the first time as she exhaled sharply, her eyes briefly closing like she was fighting back a flood of feelings she refused to let spill over. During a brief pause, the room buzzed with whispers. Fans seated in the back exchanged shocked looks, phones buzzing with messages they couldn't send yet. Family members leaned toward each other, some offering quiet support, others clearly questioning their own loyalties. The family was left divided in that moment, not by legal arguments, but by years of unresolved hurt finally surfacing all at once. When proceedings resumed, a surprising detail was mentioned, something that hadn't been fully discussed publicly before. The shift in the room was immediate. Jasmine's head snapped up, Kirk's shoulders stiffened, and Rasheeda's eyes narrowed slightly. Whatever this detail was, it hit a nerve, and suddenly the careful control everyone had been holding onto began to slip. Jasmine's voice trembled as she responded, emotion cracking through her words, while Kirk looked like he might finally say something he'd been holding in for far too long. The tension reached a point where it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. No one knew how this moment would end, only that whatever came next would change everything. The looks exchanged, the words left unsaid, and the emotions spilling just beneath the surface made it clear this was only the beginning of a much deeper unraveling, and as the session moved forward, it was impossible to ignore the feeling that the real drama was just getting started. The mention of that unexpected detail lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Jasmine swallowed hard, her fingers curling into her palm as memories she thought she had buried started rushing back. She leaned forward, unable to stay silent, her voice sharper now, less controlled. She said this was exactly what she had been talking about, that there were things Kirk knew, things he chose not to address because it was easier to let her take the blame. Her words came fast, almost tumbling over each other, and for the first time that day, Kirk looked directly at her instead of past her. His response was delayed, like he was weighing every possible outcome before opening his mouth. When he finally spoke, his tone was defensive, edged with frustration. He said things weren't as simple as Jasmine was making them seem, that life didn't happen in clean lines and perfect explanations. That answer only fueled Jasmine further. She shook her head, letting out a bitter laugh that echoed louder than she probably intended. She accused him of rewriting history to protect himself, to protect the image he had worked so hard to maintain. Fans in the room were stunned, some leaning forward, others exchanging wide-eyed glances as the tension escalated. Rasheeda sat still, but the tightness in her jaw was impossible to miss. When she spoke again, her voice carried a quiet firmness that cut through the noise. She said the problem wasn't just the past, it was the choices being made in the present. She made it clear that regardless of who felt hurt or unheard, she was done absorbing the fallout of decisions she didn't make. Her words landed heavily, and for a moment, even Jasmine seemed taken aback by the directness. The exchange triggered reactions from those sitting behind them. A family member on Kirk's side shifted uncomfortably, whispering something under their breath, while someone close to Jasmine shook their head in visible support. The divide in the room grew wider, lines being drawn not by loyalty alone, but by personal interpretation of truth. Fans are shocked not just by what was being said, but by how raw and unfiltered it all felt, like years of reality TV drama had suddenly shed its editing and filters. As the discussion continued, Jasmine revealed more about the emotional toll the situation had taken on her. She spoke about nights spent replaying conversations in her head, about feeling erased from the narrative whenever Kirk denied her perspective. Her voice cracked briefly, and though she quickly regained control, the vulnerability was unmistakable. Kirk's expression softened for a fraction of a second, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by a guarded stare. Kirk responded by talking about pressure, about being pulled in different directions, about trying to protect his family while facing constant public scrutiny. He insisted he never intended to hurt anyone, a statement that drew a sharp exhale from Rasheeda. When she spoke again, her words were clipped, precise. She said intention didn't erase impact, and that apology without accountability meant nothing. The room fell silent after that, the weight of her statement settling in. A brief recess was called, and the atmosphere shifted but didn't lighten. In the hallway, Jasmine paced back and forth, her emotions spilling over now that the formal setting had loosened its grip. She spoke in hushed but intense tones to someone close to her, frustration evident in every gesture. Kirk stood apart, leaning against the wall, staring at the floor like he was trying to outrun his own thoughts. Rasheeda stayed seated, eyes closed, breathing deeply, as if grounding herself before stepping back into the storm. Whispers spread quickly during the break. Speculation flew, with fans and observers dissecting every word that had been said so far. Some believed Jasmine was finally getting her moment of validation, others felt Kirk was being unfairly cornered, and many sympathized deeply with Rasheeda, seeing her as the quiet casualty of it all. The family was left divided not only in seating arrangements but in belief systems, each side convinced they were standing on the side of truth. When everyone reconvened, the mood was even heavier. Jasmine sat straighter, resolve replacing some of the earlier shakiness. Kirk looked more guarded, like he had built a wall around himself during the break. Rasheeda's expression was calm again, but there was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there before. As the conversation resumed, it became clear that whatever hope there had been for a simple resolution was slipping further away. Another revelation surfaced, this time tied to timing and communication. Jasmine claimed there were conversations that had been conveniently forgotten, moments where promises were made and later denied. Kirk countered by questioning her interpretation, suggesting emotions had blurred facts. That suggestion ignited Jasmine once more, her voice rising as she insisted her reality was not a misunderstanding. The clash felt less like a legal debate and more like a personal showdown that had been waiting years to happen. Rasheeda listened, arms folded now, her patience thinning. When she finally spoke, her words carried a warning tone. She said she was done being in the middle, done being expected to absorb the emotional damage while others fought for validation. She made it clear that whatever the outcome of this day, things would never return to how they were. That statement sent a ripple through the room, fans gasping softly, fully aware they were witnessing a turning point. As the session edged closer to its next phase, the energy felt volatile. Every look, every pause, every unfinished sentence hinted at deeper truths still waiting to surface. Nothing felt settled, nothing felt resolved, and as the clock ticked forward, it became increasingly clear that this courtroom confrontation was unraveling more than just a case. It was peeling back layers of resentment, regret, and reality that none of them could ignore any longer, setting the stage for an even more explosive continuation of the drama. The tension after Rasheeda's warning didn't fade, it multiplied. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms like armor, her eyes locked straight ahead but her mind clearly racing. Kirk shifted again, this time rubbing his face slowly, as if the weight of everything finally caught up to him. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were listening. Fans are shocked because this was no longer just about facts or statements, it was about pride, survival, and who would walk out of this day with their truth intact. As the discussion continued, Jasmine spoke again, but this time her tone changed. It wasn't fiery, it wasn't explosive, it was almost resigned. She said she never wanted it to get this far, that she had hoped conversations behind closed doors would spare everyone this public unraveling. Then her voice hardened. She said the reason they were here was because silence had been used as a weapon against her. Every time she tried to speak, she was dismissed, minimized, or labeled as bitter. She looked directly at Kirk when she said that, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Kirk's response came slower than before. He admitted there were moments he handled wrong, conversations he avoided because he didn't want to deal with the consequences. That admission sent a murmur through the room. Jasmine's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she hadn't expected to hear that out loud. Rasheeda remained still, but her fingers tightened together, a subtle sign that every word was landing deeper than she was letting on. Kirk went on to say he felt trapped between doing what he thought was best for his marriage and acknowledging a situation that never should have escalated. He said pressure from all sides made him shut down instead of step up. Jasmine shook her head, whispering under her breath, clearly unconvinced. When she spoke again, she said shutting down didn't erase responsibility, it just transferred pain onto everyone else. The exchange drew an emotional reaction from someone seated behind them, a close family friend who quietly muttered that this was all avoidable. That single comment sparked tension among the onlookers, with whispers growing louder, opinions clashing in hushed tones. The family was left divided not just by relationships but by interpretation of accountability. Some believed Kirk was finally owning up, others felt it was too little, too late. Rasheeda finally spoke again, and this time there was no softness left in her voice. She said she was tired of hearing explanations that centered everyone else's feelings while hers were treated like an afterthought. She spoke about betrayal not just as an act but as a pattern. A pattern of being expected to stay strong, stay quiet, and stay loyal while carrying the emotional burden alone. Fans watching later would say this was the moment her pain became undeniable. Jasmine looked at Rasheeda then, really looked at her, and for a brief moment the tension between them shifted. Jasmine said she never set out to hurt her, that she understood more than anyone how damaging the situation was. Rasheeda's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in guarded skepticism. She responded by saying intention didn't matter when damage was done, and that sympathy didn't equal trust. That line hit hard, leaving Jasmine momentarily speechless. As things escalated, another piece of information surfaced, something tied to messages and timelines. The room reacted instantly. Jasmine sat up straighter, insisting this proved she wasn't lying. Kirk stiffened, his expression closing off again. Rasheeda inhaled sharply, clearly processing what this meant for her own understanding of events. The energy in the room shifted from heated to electric. Jasmine elaborated, explaining how certain conversations happened earlier than Kirk had publicly admitted. She said this wasn't about rewriting history, it was about finally correcting it. Kirk interrupted, his voice rising slightly, saying memories were being selectively recalled. That interruption triggered Jasmine, who shot back that selective memory was not the same as truth. Emotions ran high as voices overlapped, forcing the room into controlled chaos. Rasheeda raised her hand slightly, signaling she wanted to speak. When she did, her words cut through the noise. She said what hurt the most wasn't just what happened, but how often she had been left in the dark. She talked about finding out information after the fact, through rumors or confrontations instead of honesty. Her voice wavered for a split second, then steadied again as she said trust once broken doesn't magically repair itself. The reaction from the audience was immediate. Some nodded in agreement, others wiped away tears. Fans are shocked by how deeply personal this had become, far beyond the surface-level drama they expected. This wasn't entertainment anymore, this was real emotional fallout unfolding in real time. Another pause followed, heavier than the first. Jasmine stared down at her hands, visibly fighting emotion. Kirk leaned back, exhaling slowly like the fight had drained him. Rasheeda closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with a resolve that suggested something inside her had shifted permanently. When the conversation resumed, Jasmine spoke about consequences. She said being labeled and dismissed had affected her mental health, her relationships, her sense of self-worth. She said standing here today wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming her narrative. Kirk listened without interrupting this time, his expression conflicted, as if he finally understood the depth of her resentment. Kirk responded by saying he never imagined things would reach this level of damage. He admitted fear had driven many of his choices, fear of losing his family, fear of public judgment, fear of facing himself. Rasheeda let out a quiet laugh, not amused, but tired. She said fear didn't excuse betrayal, and that protecting a family required honesty, not avoidance. As the back and forth continued, it became clear no single apology or explanation would resolve what was unfolding. Too many layers had been exposed, too many wounds reopened. The family was left divided not just emotionally, but in what they believed healing should look like. Toward the end of this phase, the energy in the room felt altered. Jasmine looked more resolved than angry now. Kirk appeared worn down, the bravado gone. Rasheeda seemed distant, like she had emotionally stepped back to protect herself. Fans would later say this was the moment they realized nothing would ever go back to normal. As the session moved forward, unresolved questions hung heavy in the air. Was this the beginning of accountability or just another cycle of damage control? Could honesty come too late? And most importantly, what would this mean for relationships that had already been stretched to their breaking point? With every unanswered look and every unfinished sentence, it became clear the next phase of this confrontation would be even more revealing, because now, there was no hiding from the truth any longer. The atmosphere shifted again as the conversation pressed forward, heavier but more focused, like everyone in the room understood they were past the point of surface-level arguments. Jasmine straightened her back, her voice steadier now, and said she was done reacting emotionally. She said this was about facts, patterns, and accountability, not who could speak the loudest or cry the hardest. That statement alone changed the energy. Kirk nodded slowly, as if bracing himself, while Rasheeda's expression remained unreadable, her guard firmly in place. Jasmine continued, explaining how the narrative around her had been shaped without her consent. She said every time she tried to clarify her side, it was framed as an attack or an attempt to disrupt a family. She emphasized that she never had the power people accused her of having, only her voice, and even that had been questioned repeatedly. Fans are shocked because this was the first time Jasmine sounded less. Kirk responded with a sigh that seemed to come from deep in his chest. He admitted that controlling the narrative had felt easier than confronting it. He said he convinced himself that silence would protect everyone involved, when in reality it only allowed resentment to grow unchecked. His honesty drew mixed reactions. Some people in the room softened, others crossed their arms tighter, clearly unconvinced that this realization hadn't come far too late. Rasheeda shifted in her seat, finally leaning forward. When she spoke, her words were slow but firm. She said hearing this now didn't bring relief, it brought frustration. She explained that growth spoken aloud after damage was done didn't undo years of emotional strain. She talked about the internal battles she fought privately, trying to balance loyalty with self-respect. The room listened closely, aware that her perspective was the emotional center of everything unfolding. Jasmine glanced toward Rasheeda, then looked down briefly before speaking again. She said she understood that nothing she said could erase the pain Rasheeda experienced. She acknowledged that regardless of intent, the situation had hurt someone who never deserved to be collateral damage. Her voice softened slightly, and for the first time, there was no edge to it, only honesty. Rasheeda listened without interrupting, her expression guarded but attentive. The moment felt fragile, like it could either become a step toward understanding or collapse under the weight of everything unsaid. Kirk cleared his throat and spoke again, saying he wished he had handled things differently from the start. He admitted that fear of consequences led him to make choices that only deepened the divide. His voice cracked slightly, and though he quickly recovered, the vulnerability was obvious. A reaction rippled through the audience. Some fans exchanged glances that suggested sympathy, while others shook their heads, clearly feeling that regret without action was meaningless. The family was left divided in their reactions, each side interpreting Kirk's words through their own experiences with him. Trust, once fractured, proved difficult to rebuild even in moments of apparent honesty. As the discussion moved forward, the focus turned to impact rather than intention. Jasmine spoke about how being publicly discredited affected her reputation and mental health. She said being labeled had followed her into every space, making it hard to move forward or be taken seriously. Kirk listened quietly, no longer interrupting, no longer deflecting. Rasheeda watched him closely, as if measuring whether this silence meant growth or exhaustion. Rasheeda then spoke about boundaries. She said that regardless of how things unfolded legally or publicly, her priority was protecting her peace. She made it clear that forgiveness, if it ever came, would be on her terms, not under pressure from public opinion or expectations of strength. Fans are shocked because this wasn't the Rasheeda who absorbed pain quietly in the past. This was a woman drawing lines with clarity and resolve. Jasmine nodded slightly, acknowledging that statement. She said she wasn't seeking forgiveness from Rasheeda, only understanding of her own truth. She emphasized that coexistence didn't require agreement, only respect. That distinction shifted the tone again, pulling the conversation away from blame and toward reality. Kirk spoke next, his voice quieter than before. He said hearing both sides laid out so plainly forced him to confront the ripple effects of his actions. He admitted he had underestimated how deeply things had affected everyone involved. His words weren't dramatic, but they carried weight because they lacked the defensiveness that had dominated earlier exchanges. The room fell into a brief silence, one that felt reflective rather than tense. People processed what had been said, the absence of shouting making the weight of the conversation feel even heavier. Fans watching later would say this silence was louder than any argument. That quiet was broken when another detail surfaced, one related to future expectations. Jasmine said she refused to continue being spoken about without being spoken to. She made it clear that any further discussion involving her would require direct communication. Kirk nodded, agreeing that transparency was necessary moving forward. Rasheeda didn't immediately respond, her pause speaking volumes about how deeply trust had been damaged. When Rasheeda finally spoke, she said moving forward would require consistency, not just words spoken under pressure. She said she had heard apologies before, promises before, and that what mattered now was behavior. Her tone wasn't angry, it was resolved, like she had already made peace with whatever outcome awaited her. The reactions around the room reflected the complexity of the moment. Some people looked hopeful, others skeptical. Fans are shocked by how this had shifted from explosive confrontation to emotional reckoning. The family was left divided not by volume, but by belief in whether change was truly possible. As the session edged toward another transition, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted. Jasmine appeared calmer, as if speaking her truth had lifted a weight she had carried too long. Kirk looked humbled, stripped of defenses. Rasheeda seemed stronger but more distant, emotionally bracing for whatever came next. Unanswered questions still hovered. Could accountability exist without reconciliation? Could boundaries coexist with shared history? And could truth, once finally spoken, lead to healing or simply clearer separation? As the moment closed, one thing was certain. The drama had evolved beyond accusations into something far more complex, and whatever came next would test not just relationships, but identities, loyalty, and the meaning of closure itself. After everything you've just heard, one thing is clear: this story is far from over. Emotions ran high in that courtroom, truths were spoken, and yet so many questions are still hanging in the air unanswered. You've seen how Jasmine stood her ground, refusing to let her narrative be erased any longer. You've witnessed Kirk finally begin to confront the weight of his choices, even if some feel it came too late. And you've felt Rasheeda's pain, strength, and boundaries collide in a way that left the room silent and the family divided. Now ask yourself this: was this day really about closure, or was it just the beginning of a deeper unraveling? Did Kirk's words signal real accountability, or were they another attempt at damage control under pressure? Did Jasmine finally reclaim her truth, or will she still be forced to fight to be believed? And where does this leave Rasheeda, a woman who has endured public scrutiny, private heartbreak, and expectations to remain unshaken through it all? Fans are shocked because nothing about this situation fits neatly into a box. There are no clear villains, no easy heroes, only people carrying years of unresolved pain into one room and letting it spill out. The tension you felt wasn't just drama, it was history colliding with reality. And even after everything that was said, the silence at the end spoke volumes. Silence about what happens next. Silence about whether trust can ever be rebuilt. Silence about whether forgiveness is even on the table. And this is where you come in. Because your voice matters just as much in this conversation. You've followed the journey, you've watched the ups and downs, and now you've seen one of the most intense moments yet. So what do you think? Who do you believe showed the most growth in that courtroom? Do you feel Jasmine finally got the acknowledgement she deserved? Do you think Kirk can truly change moving forward, or is this a cycle repeating itself? And most importantly, do you think Rasheeda should continue to protect her peace at all costs, even if it means emotional distance? This story doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling or when the courtroom clears out. It lives on in conversations, in opinions, and in the choices these people make after the spotlight fades. And that's why we want to hear from you. Scroll down and drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't hold back. Tell us exactly how you feel, because this debate is far from settled. If this breakdown had you leaning in, replaying moments, or questioning everything you thought you knew, make sure you hit that like button. It lets us know you want more deep dives into the real drama behind the headlines. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single update, twist, or revelation as this story continues to unfold. Trust us, if today was intense, what comes next might be even bigger. Turn on your notifications too, because when new details drop, when reactions surface, and when the next chapter reveals itself, you'll want to be the first to know. This is not just gossip, this is a saga, and you're part of the audience shaping how it's talked about. Remember, stories like this don't have simple endings. They evolve, they resurface, and they challenge everything we think we understand about loyalty, truth, and accountability. So stay right here with us, keep the conversation going, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Because this drama isn't done yet, and neither are we.